Final reading for this morning from the story comes from the Gospel according to John, the 20th chapter, verses 24 through 29. Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." This is the word of the Lord. Amen. So, could you picture Jesus wearing a cape and a black top hat? Yes, Pastor might have lost his mind. But that's the image that went through my head as I read all of these accounts of Jesus appearing to the disciples and others after the resurrection, with references such as escaping from the grave, disappearing from Emmaus, and his appearance in the upper room when Thomas was there. All I could picture was a poster advertising the new act that came to the local stage, Jesus the Magnificent. But he is no illusionist. Something greater is going on here. The events of Easter usually draw our attention to Jesus and his act of resurrection. But I noticed something very different in this week's chapter of the story. Reading through all of these post-resurrection accounts, I noticed that those who knew Jesus began to question their faith. Those who were closest to them, those who were closest to him, felt a sense of distance after the crucifixion. Their words and their actions, for many of them, denied their faith, denied their acceptance of the good news of the gospel. Some of them even returned to old habits, old behaviors, and former ways of living. But now, after the resurrection, those who had distanced themselves, those who had moved away, are given the opportunity to renew their faith, to renew their commitment and their devotion to Jesus. Just a few examples. Mary, appearing at the empty tomb, sees someone who she assumes is the gardener and says, "They have taken his body and we do not know where they have laid him." Somehow Jesus' proclamation of the resurrection in 3 days was escaping her at this moment. And then there were those on the road to Emmaus. When Jesus appeared to them and their eyes were closed to knowing who he was, he asked why they were so concerned, and they said, "We thought he would be the one to redeem Israel." But evidently not. And then there was Thomas, who was known to say, "Unless I see the holes in his hands and touch the wound in his side, I cannot believe that he is resurrected." But the good news this morning is this. For each of these people that doubted, Jesus had a word to speak to them. For each one who had distanced themselves, who had started living as if Jesus never had, Jesus had a word for them. To the first, all he needed to say was Mary. And in calling her by name, she knew it was the Lord. And starting with Moses and the prophets, those who were on the road to Emmaus heard once again the good news of the gospel. And at the end of their journey, having invited him to have dinner with them, it was when he broke bread that they would recognize him. And for Thomas, upon seeing Jesus and being invited to touch the holes in his hand and see where the spear pierced him in the side, Thomas proclaimed, "My Lord and my God." For each of these people, the separation they experienced was restored because Jesus was present in their midst. And my guess is that many of us here have often gone through those seasons in our lives when we doubt the presence of Christ. Maybe we've gone through those seasons when our actions and our words continue to betray and deny the presence and the life of Christ. Like his first century believers, we return to our old ways of living. And even in those actions, we experience a separation from the Christ. And so many of us need another kind of resurrection appearance, which would give us the opportunity to turn from our sinful ways and to live once again as those who would witness the presence of Christ in our lives. Perhaps like Peter, we need such an opportunity. Peter, the one who, with the cross in his sight, would state 3 times, "I don't know him." And after the resurrection, Jesus would give him the opportunity to restore that relationship by asking him 3 times, "Do you love me?" And maybe we would have to travel that same painful journey in answering that same question 3 times with the words, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And the commission would come, "Feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep." He is no magician. Jesus is the risen Lord, and we can recognize his presence even today. When we hear his voice and he calls our name, when we witness his actions such as the breaking of bread, and we know he is here, when we see his presence and he invites us to touch and believe. Have you had those moments where you've been living post-crucifixion instead of post-resurrection? Have you lived those moments where your words and actions betray and deny Christ instead of proclaiming his resurrection? The truth is proclaimed in these stories, that for those of us who have been there, Christ longs to restore that relationship through words and actions and revealing his presence. The good news is that he longs to be in relationship with us and to draw us closer once again.